This podcast is for mature audiences only. In this podcast, I explore stories of darkness from history, myth, and legend. I am Dennis Sarah, and this is Evil. This episode is brought to you by Horror Pack. Elgin, Illinois. Along the Fox River, there are old colonial-style homes. These homes all have their own histories and personalities. Most of these colonials were built in the opening decades of the 20th century. Today, when you drive by these homes, you get a glimpse of those histories and personalities. You see, some have been restored with love and care. Some of these homes have been completely remodeled and hardly resemble their former selves. And some are in disrepair, but have a hint of what they once meant to the families that lived there. In 1991, one such home was found by human resource consultant Peter Eber. Peter had moved his family into a fixer-upper on the Fox River. For the last few years, he had moved his family around the country whenever a new consulting opportunity presented itself. 6 times in the last 4 years, to be exact. All this moving around challenged his wife, Carrie. She was always tasked with coordinating the repairs of the new house. Of course, by the time the house was repaired and started feeling like a home, it was time to move on. Once Peter fulfilled his consulting contract, he would have a new gig lined up by headhunters. Carrie became an expert on fixing up homes and managing the contractors. Constant moving was hard on their 8-year-old son, Oliver. It's hard to make friends when you have attended 6 different schools in those 4 years. But Oliver learned to amuse himself with pretend friends and an active imagination. He often played near his mother as she was working on some home repair project. Oliver would be caught up in some big adventure and be oblivious to the sounds of construction nearby. Although this particular house at Elgin had a dire history, Peter purchased it from a real estate investor. The investor had bought the property sight unseen at an auction through a proxy. The house had gone up for auction after the taxes went unpaid for years. According to the neighbors, previous owners had simply abandoned the property. It is said that they had packed up one night and left in a hurry. Carrie had her doubts about the property. It was definitely showing its age. The house had warped floors and water pipes that moaned, although they seemed to moan only at night when everyone was trying to sleep. Also, there must have been a loose water valve, as some nights a slight metal jingling sound could be heard. Peter's job kept him away for long hours. It was up to Carrie to decide on the order of the repairs and budget out her time to oversee the work. She would always throw herself into these projects. Her goal was to have a house transform into a home as soon as possible. Knowing that Peter's current job would eventually end, she wanted as much time as possible in a home and not just another project. Unfortunately, this Elgin house had a few mishaps that slowed the repairs. There was the plumber that broke a water pipe and flooded the basement. The carpenter that fell from the ladder and broke his arm on the new stair railing. Little things also contributed, like that metal jingling sound the plumber could never find. After being in the house for 2 months, Carrie finally made it to the attic. The trapdoor was in the ceiling of Oliver's room. It was about what she expected for an attic, dusty and a few mouse droppings. She inspected the attic from the trapdoor by scanning her flashlight back and forth. It was bare, save one leftover piece of ratty furniture. Against the far wall was a single small wooden chair. And on that lone chair was a doll. Carrie approached the chair and inspected the doll in the light of her flashlight. The doll was facing the wall, and it was about 3 feet in length. The doll resembled a jester, a clown. It had a goofy smile, yellow eyes, and a floppy three-pointed hat that ended in little bells. It was obviously worn and maybe as old as the house itself. Some of the face paint was scuffed, the multi-pattern jumper was torn, and only one bell still remained on its hat. Carrie smirked and lifted the doll. She could tell it was constructed in another time. No plastic parts at all. The doll was well crafted from wood. Oliver was playing in his room below when he heard his mother say, "Heads up, Oliver." The doll landed on Oliver's bed with a single jingle from its only bell. Oliver went to the doll, held him up with reverence, and proclaimed, "Mr. Jingles!" Carrie laughed at the immediate response from Oliver. It was good to hear him excited about something. She moved back to the small chair and picked it up. Carrie noticed a small metal nameplate screwed into the back support. It read, "Mr. Jingles." Carrie cocked her head while reading the nameplate. She glanced back at the hall that led back to Oliver's bedroom. Carrie heard Oliver playing with the doll. She carried the small chair to the trap door and climbed out onto the top of the ladder. Carrie shut the door and looked down at Oliver. "Oliver, why did you call the doll Mr. Jingles?" Oliver stopped what he was doing and looked up at his mom. "Because that's his name, Mommy." Carrie scrunched her brow and descended down the ladder. She placed the chair down, gathered the ladder, and made her way to the hallway. Carrie paused and glanced back at Oliver. He continued to play with the clown doll. Carrie shook her head and continued down the hall. That evening, Peter came home about 10 o'clock, tired and overworked. Oliver was already sleeping, and Carrie was enjoying a well-deserved glass of wine in front of the TV. Carrie and Peter's evening played out as usual. Wine, small talk, and falling asleep on the couch with the TV on. Carrie woke first. The living room was illuminated only by the TV. It was running some infomercial with a host that was way too happy. Carrie stretched and used the remote to turn off the TV. As she reached out to Peter to wake him, she heard a small bell jingle. Carrie was not sure where the sound came from. She stood up and glanced around the dark house. The only light in the house was from the street lamps shining through windows, creating beams of light that interrupted the deep darkness. Carrie stood and listened, but the sound did not repeat. Carrie gently shook Peter as she continued to look around. Peter half awoke, as he usually did, and began his typical sleepwalk to the bedroom. Carrie guided him up the stairs and down the hall to the master bedroom. As she was in the habit of doing most every night, Carrie moved Peter's shoes and dress clothes and placed a blanket over him. He was always exhausted when he returned from work. With Peter sleeping, Carrie walked down the dark hall to Oliver's room. The old house shifted and creaked under her weight. She spied through the half-open door and saw the lump under a pile of blankets that was Oliver. As she was about to leave, she saw Mr. Jingles' empty chair up against the wall. Carrie poked her head into the room and looked around. Oliver's room was dimly lit by a nightlight. Carrie did not see the doll that was found in the attic. Not in the chair, not lying on the floor, not even in Oliver's bed. Carrie bent down to look under the bed, but it was too dark to see. As she stood back up, she heard the jingling sound again. It was coming from downstairs. Carrie went back to her bedroom and grabbed her flashlight. She made her way to the stairs and turned the flashlight on. As she started to descend, the flash illuminated the stairway below her. A small figure darted from the light into the darkness of the kitchen. Carrie gasped at the sudden movement. After hesitating for several seconds, she crept down the stairs while shining the flashlight in front of her. Carrie reached the bottom of the stairs and slowly made her way to the kitchen doorway. She heard movement in the kitchen, the sound of a knife being pulled from its wooden block. Carrie reached the kitchen doorway and leaned part of her body and head over so she could see. She searched the kitchen with the light while maintaining some cover. As the light moved across the kitchen, Carrie noticed movement under the kitchen table. She bent down and aimed the light under the table. A small figure, accompanied by the jingling of a bell, sprang from under the kitchen table at Carrie. It had the three-pointed jester hat, multi-pattern jumper, and a knife in its small hand. The knife slashed Carrie across her hand that was carrying the flashlight. The light fell, and Carrie instinctively kicked out at the attacker, knocking the small clown back under the table. Carrie scrambled back to her feet and ran up the stairs, screaming the entire time. Glancing over her shoulder, she could see the clown moving through the beams of light made by the streetlights. The steel of the knife reflecting the light, and the lone bell in its hat jingling as it ran after her. Oliver's room was the closest to the stairway, and Carrie ran towards it as Peter emerged from the master bedroom further down the hall. Even in the darkness of the hall, Peter could feel Carrie's terror as she bolted into Oliver's room. As Peter made it to Oliver's doorway, he saw what was terrorizing his wife. Standing at the end of the hallway, with a knife in its hand and basked in shadow, was a 3-foot-tall clown. Carrie made it to Oliver's bed as Peter passed the doorway, making his way towards the stairs. Carrie removed the bed covers and screamed. Instead of seeing her child laying in the bed, there was a naked wooden doll with a goofy smile and yellow eyes. In the hall, she heard Peter scream. Carrie turned and saw Oliver dressed in a multi-pattern jumper, 3-pointed hat, and he had yellow eyes. His knife hand was bathed in blood up to his elbow. I hope you enjoyed that. That was an original story by me. As I mentioned in the beginning, this episode was brought to you by Horror Pack. Horror Pack's a great sponsor. Every month you get 4 new horror movies, either on DVD or Blu-ray. And if you're really into horror movies, kind of like I am, you can sign up for both the DVD and the Blu-ray, because you get 4 different movies every month. So you could get 8 movies if you're really into it like me. These movies are picked by a panel of horror film fans and filmmakers alike, and every month's selections are surprises. They're brand new movies, shrink-wrapped, come right to your door. To sign up and get your discount, go to horrorpack.com/go/evilpodcast, or simply just go to evilpodcast.com and click on the Horror Pack box. They've been a great sponsor of Evil Podcast. There's other ways you can support Evil Podcast if you like. One of the best ways is simply going to iTunes and leaving us a 5-star review. That gets us noticed by other listeners. The more the merrier, right? Also, you can connect with me through evilpodcast.com or Twitter. I'm at Dennis Sarah on Twitter. On our site, you can also link to us on Facebook. Or if you like, buy an Evil Podcast t-shirt and show your support. Finally, if you like, and I sure would appreciate it, if you go to patreon.com/evilpodcast, you can support this podcast with a pledge as little as $1 a month. Although that doesn't seem much, those $1 add up. It does cost a little bit to keep the lights on here at Evil Podcast. And if you want past episodes, please go to evilpodcast.com. The archives are there. Again, thank you for listening. And remember, be good.